Hi folks, I'm JB and welcome to part 1 of my beginner allotment mini-series. All of the details can be found in the description with the playlist and kind of links to other episodes as they come out. But today, our first episode, we're going to be talking about those very first stages of planning and thinking about your allotment, maybe even before you sign on the dotted line and consider taking one. What I'm really excited about with this series is we're doing something a bit different. You can see in front of me, hopefully, that this is a brand new, untouched plot. Now, allotments come in all shapes and sizes when you first take them on, and I think I've been very, very lucky with this one, especially when you compare it to my first plot, which you can see here, and that was a complete mission. But I'm really excited to be able to kind of film this mini-series whilst I'm putting in practice all of the advice that I will be giving throughout these videos. So you've been on a waiting list for months and months, maybe even years, and you finally get the call. Someone invites you to come and have a look at what might be your new allotment plot. I think there are 4 things that you should take when you first come to look at your allotment plot. Something to have a little dig and a root around in the soil, either a proper spade or a fork. You really want to get a little idea before you start doing any planning. You want to get an idea of what the soil there is like. Not necessarily fertility, but in terms of its physical makeup. Are you on hard clay, or is it super soft sand that all the water is going to run through? So take a spade, have a little root around. You might as well want to check that there's nothing buried under the soil, no nasty surprises, plastic, carpet, things like that. The next, probably most important thing to remember to take is a little pad, a pen and paper, something to take down some physical notes of things that occur to you while you're there on your first visit, and also to sketch a quick plan. And third, you need a tape measure to be able to put those measurements on paper. Planning an allotment isn't necessary. You don't have to do it, but it will pay off. Even if, like me, you don't love plans. I almost never stick to plans, but I always try and at least get a basic idea. It will pay off in a big way. And the final thing is a camera or just your phone. But what you want to do when you first visit a new plot is take hundreds of pictures. Take as many pictures as you possibly can from as many angles as you can. This will, 1, help you with planning when you finally go away, and maybe you decide to take it, maybe you don't, but you can start to get thinking about what is going to go where. And also, trust me when I say you will be so thankful that you have all of those photos to maybe look back on one day and compare the before and after. What I really want to do is get you thinking about some questions that you want to be having in the back of your mind. I'm not going to be able to answer those questions for you, and it's quite difficult giving advice on allotments because they are all so different, and everyone who is watching this video is different as well. Oh, there's a lovely pied wagtail in my tree. You're going to have to take stock of what's there at first. You have no idea what to expect, and sometimes allotments can be in a right state. The first thing that I want you to think about is what the policy for the allotment is. Do you have to take on the first one that is offered to you? Have they given you a couple of choices? Can you go back on the waiting list for a couple of months? Taking the first one that is offered to you is not always the best decision. There's things to think about, like how able-bodied you are. I'm relatively fit and relatively young, so when I was shown my plot, I just went, you know what, I'm ready for anything. I'll do it, and I loved the idea of relishing that challenge, but that will not be true for everyone. When I came to view this plot, there were certainly no deal breakers for me, although there were a few strange oddities, like these bottles have been used to line some of the beds, and this strange composting structure. Also, they've chosen to line the paths with some strange things, but certainly nothing that was a deal breaker for me. If there had been maybe, masses of brambles or pernicious weeds, it would have been one for me to stop and really have a good think about whether or not this would be the right plot for me. The next thing to really think about are the conditions of the site. The first and probably most important thing is, where does the light go? I've obviously been on here a while, and this time of year, this is early March, it could be a little bit tricky to really get your eye in and figure out exactly where the sun goes, but for me, I know it rises in the east and goes to the west. So you want to be thinking about exactly where the light is going to fall. Do you have loads of structures, tall structures next door? Do you have tall trees that are going to shade the beds? Lots of shade isn't necessarily, once again, a deal breaker, but if your whole plot is shaded, you are going to run into some problems. I can see back here there's a very tall cherry tree, which I hadn't really noticed before, and I know that that is going to cast some shade. It means some of the beds are going to take a lot longer to warm up around this time of year. And instead of planting in them in, say, mid-March, I'm going to have to wait a good few weeks later before they're ready to plant into. So have a think about light, and there's lots of other conditions to think about as well. How exposed is the site? You know, how much wind does it get? If you look around, are there greenhouses? Are there greenhouses that have lots of glass that have blown out and shattered all over the floor? Are you in a kind of semi-urban, like nice place like I am down here on the south coast? Or are you up in, I don't know, Lincolnshire or something like that, where the winds pick up over these vast flat lands? It's something to think about. You might need to consider planting a shelter belt or putting up fencing or something like that. Most of these problems, they have solutions, but you want to be thinking about whether or not you're willing to put in the work to secure those solutions. Things like flooding, another thing to think about. Are there any signs that it might flood? Are you near a river? Are there any big puddles? Is the soil all squelchy, you know, after rain? Aspect and slope are another thing. Are you on a north-facing slope? What's that going to do to the sun? Are you on a steep slope where soil erosion is going to be an issue? And you might need to think about putting in kind of terraced raised beds. The next thing I'd suggest you start thinking about is what infrastructure is on the plot. You know, take a few notes about what's there at the moment. If it's there, you'll probably notice it. But if it's not there, you might not think about the fact that it's not there, and it's something that you might need to build or install yourself. Things like sheds. Is there a shed on the plot? What kind of condition is it in? Double check, you know, have a little look inside, give it a shake. Is it sound, or is it going to be a lot of work to maybe dismantle it and rebuild a new one? Or is it something that you could repair with a few hours work? You know, does it just need some new roof felt? Another question as well, does the site have water? Is there kind of mains water? Are there taps that you can connect to? Or do you just have to rely on rainwater? Rainwater sites are doable, it's doable, but once again, you have to put in the work. You have to collect some IBCs, you have to think about these things. You know, I just started thinking, and actually the list is huge. I just went away and started making some notes, and in fact, I'm just going to read from them because there are so many things to think about. Do you get a wood chip or a manure delivery or something like that? These are all questions that you can ask your kind of your tour guide. They're not a tour guide, but you know, the first person who comes with you to kind of let you into the plots and show you around. These are all questions that you can ask them about the water, if there's deliveries. What are the rules about what you're allowed to install? How many greenhouses? How much space can you put up for a polytunnel, for example? We have quite strict rules here about that. One really important thing to think about that you just might not occur to you is what the access is like. Can you get timber delivered on the back of a big lorry? Can you order a big load of manure or compost? Can you order wood chip if that's something that you want? If there's no vehicular access, it might be a little bit more tricky, especially if you don't have your own car or mode of transport. Do they arrange skips is another really important question, especially when you're first taking on a new plot and there might be loads of stuff that you need to clear. What is a skip? Some people don't know that. It's basically like a big communal metal bin. We have 2 a year that are delivered here and it's chaos. Every day that the skip arrives, everyone rushes down and tries to get in as quick as possible. So do ask if there's a skip, otherwise you're going to be ferrying maybe a surprising amount of rubbish in your own transport. And another question to ask your kind of guide is whether or not they might do a kind of strim for you, or they might help you when you first get it done. Normally it's going to be your responsibility to get it all cleared, but if you have loads of scrap that you have to get rid of yourself, sometimes they might offer to help out, or sometimes they might even offer to strim the plot for you beforehand if you're very lucky. I would really strongly encourage you, if you see anyone on the plot during your first ever visit, try and chew their ear off. There is so much information that you might be able to get from a neighbour that you would get nowhere else. Things like historical issues, like things like flooding, pests, you know, do they have loads of issues with foxes coming and digging everything up? Badgers, squirrels, bunny rabbits. Bunny rabbits, why did I say that? All these kind of things that you just wouldn't find out without first-hand experience that might be quite frustrating to learn firsthand. Things like weeds as well is another really important thing to think about, and your neighbours might have a really good idea about what kind of weeds and issues there are under the surface. And weeds are another thing I really strongly advise you look at before you go to your visit. If you're a keen gardener, you'll be familiar, but if this might be your first proper garden, like allotments were for me, then I think it's a good idea to familiarise yourself with some of the weeds before you go. You can see here, this is a line of fruit bushes. They don't look too healthy, but underneath there is all of this grass, and I know that this is something called couch grass, which spreads via the roots and is manageable, but it does take a bit of effort to get under control at first. Not all weeds are as easy to deal with as couch grass. Bindweed is one that can be really quite frustrating, although once again I would say that's manageable. But there are some others that can really take an awful lot of time. Things like mare's tail and ground elder. I'll put a link in the description for some of the other kind of common allotment weeds. And if you have something that is completely and utterly covered, once again, it might not be a deal breaker, but it's something for you to go away and look at management techniques for it. Have a think about how much time you're going to be spending on it and whether or not it's the right plot for you. Now, I'd say I've spent quite a lot of time talking about potential negative things, but it is important as well to be excited. If you're getting a good feeling from the plot and it feels like it might be the right one for you, you can also consider the positives. Do you have, for example, things like fruit trees? These ones behind me are a bit of a mystery. It's difficult to tell at this time of year. I think there are summer fruiting, something like a green gage or a plum, but this can be really, really exciting. It's another thing to talk about with neighbours. I have an apple tree on my other plot, and my neighbours told me amazing things. They said these apples are so sweet and tasty, so I got really, really excited, and lo and behold, they were correct. It is, of course, worth getting your eye in and trying to see if there's any interesting crops that are still in the ground as well. We've got some lovely spring crocus bulbs here, and I can see all over this plot there's lots of strawberry plants. It depends, of course, on what time of year it is, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in episode 2. If you're enjoying today's video, please do remember to let myself and YouTube know by liking and subscribe if you want to see more of these allotment guides. These videos are made possible by my patron supporters, my lovely, lovely patrons, and an extra special thank you, as always, to my chili pepper tier patrons, Tony, Bill, Louise, and Andrew. My next tip, and this is really, I think, non-negotiable. I think you have to do this really early. Bring your tape measure and start measuring. Measure where the paths are, measure where the established beds are, and make all of those notes on a plan. It will definitely pay off. There is nothing more frustrating than when you go to start maybe thinking about a plan, and maybe you go to sketch something and you realize, wait a minute, I have no idea how big any of this is. And when you come to measure your plot, you should get a good idea of whether or not you have been offered a full-size plot or a half plot. In old money, these are called rods. So this is a 5-rod plot behind me, which is half size. A 10-rod plot is a traditional full-size plot. And let me tell you, if you've got kids, if you've got a full-time job, I don't have kids, do you have a full-time job? Managing a full-sized allotment plot is a massive undertaking. So you might even want to go away, have a look at that, see how much time people recommend that you spend on allotments, and maybe ask for a half plot. Start with a half plot, and if you can bring that under control, then maybe ask to expand to a full plot. I've been really incredibly lucky with mine because my 2 half plots are next to each other. And something else to consider is your personal budget. Allotmenting can be done on the cheap, but it's always going to require a little bit of investment in seeds and mostly kind of manure, organic matter, some kind of fertilizer to feed your plants. There's an awful lot of money that you can spend that isn't necessary, but I also have a video that I'll link down in the description all about my costs for the first year of an allotment that might still be quite useful. Despite the cost of living and inflation rising, I think those costs are still pretty relevant. So there's an awful lot to consider. Most of this is bonus. Like I say, you can jump right into an allotment and just go crazy with it. That is what I did. I didn't really think about most of this stuff. A lot of it I wish I had. But I don't want you to be too overwhelmed, and I would also want you to remember that there is a fantastic gardening community. I'll link some useful channels in the description, but YouTube is full of really fantastic, helpful advice from people who have real lives, okay? Like people who are juggling, managing an allotment, trying to grow veg, trying to enjoy it. with full-time jobs and all of that kind of stuff as well, which is one of the reasons that I love YouTube. I think it's really full of well-grounded advice from people who know how difficult it can be to manage all of these things. I also have a great book recommendation for beginners. This is just fantastic. It's called Allotment Month by Month by Alan Buckingham, and it's so well pitched for beginners. It takes you through things that you can be doing throughout the months, obviously, but it also has loads of really useful information about crop types and planting, and we'll talk about that later in this series. You can see the playlist for this series on your screen now, as well as my allotment transformation video if you want to see what mine first looked like when I took it on. And as well, you can see my allotment costs video, which hopefully will all be interesting to you.